May, the third Friday of May, that it was already flowering, and I was like, whoa, what's going on? But it's profusely flowering now, so we're coming up to the middle of summer here in a couple of days. So it's June the 19th, 2026, and we're going to continue this month's Ask Your Herb Doctor to wrap up some important genera of herb in different plant families that have endometriotic activity and reduce the inflammatory effects of endometriosis, and how all these things can be used in conjunction with obviously good diet and lifestyle play into it, of course, because many foods are estrogen promoting, and endometriosis is primarily driven by estrogen excess. So you're listening to Ask Your Herb Doctor, KMUD Garfield 91.1 FM. We're on the web at www.kmud.org, and we're also live streaming this program to our Western Botanical Medicine YouTube channel, so you can listen live right now on the channel by searching Western Botanical Medicine in the search bar on YouTube, and click on the live stream. Involved with plants, growing plants, and studying botany before I did my graduate 4-year degree in herbal medicine. And my time in the Botanic Gardens at Cambridge University was where I really got to see the full breadth and depth of botany at work, and the systematic beds that classified all of the plants within a family in that bed, and how those plant families were basically brought into being by Linnaeus when he collected all these plants and named them into their genera and the species name, and then the families in which these plants were, and how slowly but surely over time botanists will either say that they are lumpers or splitters, so they'll either lump plants in one family or they'll split them into a different family. And so when I finished my botany degree in 1993, things have changed quite a lot since then. So this, 30-something years ago. So in that short space of time, there are plants that I would put in a particular plant family that have now been split out and put into one or two other changes. So just like chemistry and chemicals can be related, plants are related in terms of their taxonomy, so the way that they are structurally elucidated, and now with chromosomes being part and parcel of botanical division, that kind of level of division takes them even further. But the interesting thing is, just like chemicals that have activity, and similar chemicals have similar activities, plants in differing plant families can have chemicals that are structurally similar. And so, for example, I did my dissertation on the monoterpenes, diterpenes, and triterpenes, otherwise known as the terpenoids, as another group of terpenes, and how the Lamiaceae, or it was then called the Labiataceae, the mint family, how this is one of many different families that bear terpenes primarily as an exhibition of their phytochemistry. How these chemicals are structurally similar can be applied to similar pathologies, and so when I talk about plants in different families for the treatment of endometriosis, we'll see a common thread running through some of these plant families and the chemicals that they express. So looking at the Rubiaceae, this particular family, Uncaria tomentosa, cat's claw, this is one of those plants. So cat's claw is used to treat infections, typically with inflammatory or oxidative stress. Now this is again another hallmark of endometriosis, inflammation and oxidative stress. So we're going to see a kind of familiar pattern here with different families in the plant kingdom that express phytochemicals that are anti-inflammatory and antioxidative. So that's the mechanism by which these phytochemicals can act. So with endometriosis, and specifically These anti-inflammatory and oxidative stress-reducing compounds inhibit the secretion of lipopolysaccharides as one group, inhibit nitrite formation and prostaglandin E2. And it can also change the cell cycle progression, inducing apoptosis. Uncaria, a cat's claw, then inhibits the production of tumor necrosis factor alpha, which is a powerful pro-inflammatory cytokine and a critical mediator of chronic inflammatory states. So it also controls the expression of several pro-inflammatory cytokines, for instance, tumor necrosis factor alpha, and then the interleukins, of which we'll hear a little bit more about as we go through this particular show. The inflammatory interleukins, so interleukin 1, interleukin 2, interleukin 6, and interleukin 8. These are all pro-inflammatory substances that are released by inflammatory processes and aggravate the entire state of the cell, wasting energy, causing bogginess, water accumulation, edema, etc., etc. And it's a decreased energy state. So therefore it might serve then, Uncaria as a promising alternative or an adjunct in the treatment of endometriosis. So the main thing that I remember in the early days, I mean, Lyme disease has been around for a long time, but cat's claw as a particular herb for the treatment of Lyme disease and the inflammatory state that Lyme disease induces. Okay, so the next plant family then, the Verbenaceae. I don't think that's changed in 30 years, so that's the verbena family. So the beginning of the name Verbenaceae refers to the verbenas particularly. Now, the study that I looked at investigated the use of Verbena hastata. Verbena officinalis is the official verbena, which is a bitter kind of stimulant for liver production of bile, improves fat digestion, etc. This blue vervain is actually a California native, so it's particularly found in wetlands and marshes. It has a different leaf structure and flower colour to the official vervain. Now, blue vervain's action on the uterus has been studied. The hot water extract, and this is another relation to similarities within the same genera this time, Verbena officinalis and Verbena hastata, but we're talking about hastata specifically. Hot water extracts of European verbena stimulated the secretion of LH and FSH. These are two hormones that are secreted during cell cycle or during the menstrual cycle, and this is luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone, so LH and FSH. It exerted an antithyrotropic effect, and it has an abortifacient effect also, through its inhibiting human chorionic gonadotrophin, and it has immunomodulatory effects by inhibiting phagocytosis of human granulocytes. So it's usually used to treat the fundamental causes that lead to endometriosis, which is this hormone imbalance. So that's the Verbenaceae, one particular plant, and then the Verbena hastata, a wetland native to California marshes and wetlands. And then nothing would be complete without mentioning what is just a common or garden root that many people have used, and ginger. I just can't underestimate or oversimplify ginger's use. It's not just a culinary herb. It has some awesome activity as an anti-inflammatory. It's mainly prostaglandin blocking and COX-2 blocking. So the gingerols, the shagols, and the zingerone are the prime components phytochemically within ginger that have this anti-inflammatory activity. And I had an article that I was looking at to pull out some of the specifics for some of the activity of these compounds. It's used as an anti-inflammatory and an antispasmodic, so it's kind of reducing cramping specifically. And it was used in the treatment against several inflammatory disorders in dysmenorrhea, so which is painful menstrual cycles. And this was a particular issue with endometriosis, is the dysmenorrhea that happens. So as I said, it's consumed typically as a spice in cooking, but it can also be used topically as a poultice, or actually as an infusion in baths for pelvic pain. Okay, so ginger's use mainly is COX-2 and prostaglandin inhibitor. So the endometriosis that females get ectopically outside of the uterus within the peritoneal cavity produces high levels of prostaglandins. So this tissue that should not be there in the abdominal cavity secretes a lot of prostaglandins, and this is primarily driven by COX-2 enzymes, which causes severe painful periods, dysmenorrhea. Now, gingerol and 6-Shogale actively suppress prostaglandin synthesis, providing an analgesic effect comparable in studies to non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs like mefenamic acid. So other NSAIDs are used typically, but it's definitely provided comparable effect to these non-steroidal anti-inflammatories. The other components of ginger are anti-angiogenesis. So endometriotic lesions require blood supply to grow. That's the whole point of how these things rapidly grow, just like the endometrium rapidly grows during the menstrual cycle and then sheds within a 28-day cycle. It's growing and it's shedding and then growing and shedding. So there's a lot of tissue that's being produced every month. So these lesions that are endometriotic outside of the uterus require a large blood supply to grow the same way as they do within the uterus. And Shagall's component of ginger modulate nuclear factor kappa beta and vascular endothelial growth factor, which signal this cascade. And by doing so, ginger restricts the vascularization required for lesion invasion and survival. Now, another little known fact about ginger is that it's an aromatase downregulator. So endometriosis lesions possess the ability to synthesize their own estrogens. Okay, this is the whole point about endometriosis. It's driven by estrogen, and the lesions themselves possess the ability to synthesize their own estrogen.
That's like with fibroids as well. They can also synthesize their own estrogen.
So bioactive components of ginger downregulate local aromatase expression, which may reduce the estrogen-dependent perpetuation of the lesions. And during his time with us, Dr. Pete was always talking about how pro-inflammatory estrogen is, and that the cancer industry is estrogen-driven, and that when he was advocating for the use of progesterone as a counter to estrogen, that progesterone was very anti-inflammatory and was very cancer blocking. It opposed those direct inflammatory and proliferative effects of estrogen. So talking about proliferation then, so we've talked about things like COX-2 and prostaglandin, inflammatory mediator driven inhibition. We've talked about blocking angiogenesis and new vascular tissue growth to a particular tissue, so the blood supply. So it will restrict the blood supply to these lesions. And now we just mentioned the aromatase downregulation, which doesn't allow this increased estrogen to continue. And then apoptosis and anti-proliferative effects. So apoptosis is that cell signaling, cell death signaling prompt that cells get. They have a certain finite lifespan, and then they basically are programmed to die, and so there's no out of control unregulated growth of tissues just spontaneously arising like cancers do. And then anti-proliferation is the same sort of thing, where the cells divide rapidly and the whole tissue begins to multiply rapidly. That's just not a controlled situation, and not one that the body typically allows to continue. So research on endometrial cell lines show that ginger extracts induce a caspase-dependent apoptosis, which is a programmed cell death in pathological cells. It restricts the abnormal cell cycle progression characteristic of endometrial tissue growth. So it blocks prostaglandins, it's anti-angiogenic, It blocks aromatase, and it's anti-proliferative and apoptotic. Now, in vivo studies, so these are live, human experiments or animal experiments. This particular one in rat models of endometriosis, daily administration of ginger extract significantly reduced the size, volume, and progression of endometriotic foci. So this is the kind of the concentrated point at which endometriosis begins to erupt from. It also demonstrated the capacity to lower fibrotic and oxidative stress markers. And from a pain management perspective, and obviously with the inflammation involved in endometriosis, there's a lot of pain with all of these interleukins and prostaglandins being mediated and causing vascular increased leakage in the vessels and edema and just general heat and pain. These studies indicate that between 1,000 milligrams and 2,000 milligrams, which is not a lot, this is just 1 gram, 1 gram to 2 grams of dried ginger extract daily can reduce the severity of endometriosis-associated dysmenorrhea and significantly lower serum CA125, which is a marker essentially for cancer. It's one of those kind of it's not super specific, but it's in terms of female gynecological cancers, it's one of those things that's used to measure either breast or uterine cancer progression. So 1 to 2 grams, I mean, it's not a lot of ginger, and I would definitely advocate that more could be used. I think 1 to 2 grams of ginger is a very small amount of ginger, and I think most people that cook with it probably use quite a lot more. I mean, it's 1 to 2 grams. It's very small amounts, and this wasn't a ginger extract. So I think that's the thing that would have to be classified. What extract ratio this 1,000 milligrams was? Maybe it's a 1 in 10, 1 in 20, or 1 in 50 extract. So I would think at least 5 or 10 grams of ginger a day. That would not be out of keeping with a normal amount of ginger to be able to consume without any negative effects. And ginger's anti-inflammatory, anti-proliferative, and aromatase down-regulating activity could be seen as being plausible. So it's generally recognized as safe. This is a kind of FDA classification, the GRAS, generally recognized as safe for menstrual and pelvic pain. And so ginger, one of those things I would not underestimate and would look into it for sure. I think in terms of painful periods, maybe not just endometriosis, but even painful periods, pretty much orchestrated by the same kind of cascade of inflammation and those markers of inflammation, prostaglandins and interleukins, would definitely have an anti-inflammatory effect. Okay, so that was kind of just wrapping up the last plant families, and then I wanted to look at the specific constituents that can be used in the treatment of endometriosis. So we've mentioned before epigallocatechin gallate, or EGCG. Now, green tea is a good provider of this. It's what they call a catechin monomer, and it's recently been shown from green tea extracts to treat dissimilar types of cancers, including ovarian cancers, cervical cancers, and uterine leiomyomas. It's crucial, EGCG is crucial in anti-angiogenesis and anti-oxidation. So it blocks specifically the growth of new blood vessels, and it blocks oxidation or oxidative damage. This obviously produces stress, and the whole rationale behind oxidation is it's very stressful. It increases apoptosis, which is cell death, and it inhibits the function of microvessels in the lesions, thus reducing the size and weight of lesions and inhibiting the growth of experimental endometriosis in studies. Moreover, epigallocatechin gallate selectively suppresses the expression of vascular endothelial growth factor C, vascular endothelial growth factor receptor 2, and reduces extracellular regulated kinase activation in endothelial cells. These are all pro-inflammatory. And another study demonstrated that endometriotic lesions and glandular epithelium reduced after treatment with EGCG for 2 weeks by downregulating angiogenic pro-vascular angiogenesis, both from vascular endothelial growth factor A, mRNA levels, and upregulating nuclear factor kappa beta. Okay, so a little bit about things like EGCG from green tea. Other researchers, Lashgay et al., found that this same compound, EGCG, might diminish E2 stimulated activation and proliferation and vascular endothelial growth factor expression in endometrial cells of rat models, therefore inhibiting the formation of new endometriotic lesions. Okay, so that's green tea. It's also, like I said, it's also been shown to have some anti-cancer effects. And then curcumin, from Curcuma longa, turmeric, another, I think, well studied at this point in time, well researched. There's plenty of studies supporting curcumin's use as an anti-inflammatory, not just for arthritis and other joint disorders, but inflammation in general, whatever's driving the inflammation. So it's what they call a polyphenolic monomer, and it stimulates microcirculation and possesses several pharmacological activities such as antioxidant, anti-inflammatory, and anti-proliferative effects. Now, angiogenesis, the formation of new blood vessels and new blood supply, are essential for the survival of endometriosis and its attachment to the peritoneum and the development of endometriosis, as the whole point is very highly vascular driven, just like a cancer. Now, the peritoneal fluid of women with endometriosis has more angiogenic activity than women without the disease, naturally, and the secretion of angiogenic factors into the peritoneal compartment augments the microvascularization in the peritoneum. And vascular endothelial growth factor, as its name suggests, is the most important angiogenic factor in endometriosis. So blocking this is very important. Now, moreover, curcumin reduced the secretion of IL-6 and IL-8, which are these two out of many different interleukins that are pro-inflammatory, and a compound called monocyte chemotactic protein, or MCP1, and inhibited also the activation of transcription factor nuclear factor kappa beta in human endometriotic stromal cells. So, plenty of published research online. Many different studies have used curcumin and its effects against endometriosis. And many other authors have published research supporting all of the uses of it and specifically how it's doing it at the cell level. Now, in another article by Zhang et al. Reported that curcumin decreased the number of endometriotic stromal cells at the concentrations of 10, 30, and 50 micromolar in human utopic endometriotic stromal and epithelial cells. So pretty low levels, pretty low concentrations. Okay, so the other thing I wanted to talk about here was, we've mentioned it previously at previous shows, quite some time ago, I think with Dr. Pete, about MMPs, metallomatrix proteinases. Now, let me see, I wanted to talk about, Puaria lobata is one of the next herbs. So this is kudzu. Now, it's a major puerin, which is the main compound that is used and in some studies has been isolated from kudzu as the quote-unquote active ingredient, is a major isoflavonoid extracted from the root of Puaria lobata. It's got weak estrogenic effects by binding to estrogen receptors, so in some ways it's behaving a little bit like a phytoestrogen. Now, several studies showed that the weight of endometriotic tissue and the level of serum estrogen were lower in the puerin and danazol treatment groups than in the control group of a rat endometriosis model. And puerin treatment reduced the levels of metallomatrix proteinase 9 specifically. Now, MMPs typically can also be associated with arthritis increase and increasing the blood-brain blood-brain barrier permeability in neurodegenerative disease. It's a zinc-dependent complex, and there have been topical retinoids added to skin cream formulations to inhibit these enzymes, the MMPs, to protect the skin and the activity of MMPs within the skin. So retinoids are protective against this effect.
So you're saying there's too many of these MMPs?
Yeah, well, it's like anything else, you know. The body's got a fairly tight rein on everything that's going on. It's a well orchestrated, physiological organism, and things can just get out of sync. Things can start becoming unregulated. MMPs are they're quote unquote necessary, but overproduction of MMPs can come around from various different insults. And I don't doubt for 1 minute that what we consume, what we eat, and what we drink, and what we put into our bodies has negative or beneficial effects depending on where your interests lie and what you put in your mouth. So when you're consuming good foods, and this is specifically down to things like fruits, I can't underestimate how powerful the antioxidant, anti-inflammatory activity of fruits are, and really does support the studies that have been published by many different organizations supporting fruit-based diets as being anti-cancer, and many quote-unquote alternative cancer treatments centers, not many of which are in the States, but Mexico and other countries that are not quite so, don't have so much persecution against alternative treatment of cancers, use high amounts of fruits, and obviously grapes, and those dark pigments from the berries, blackberries and blueberries, have been shown to have very, very strong free radical quenching activity. And again, free radical production and generation is another classic hallmark of cancers. So not just from its antioxidant and free radical quenching activity, but the natural benefits of fruits and all of the vitamins, etc., that are within fruits consumed in large quantities as a kind of main part of your diet can only have a beneficial effect. If you're just going to sit there and eat starches and fried foods and junk foods and takeouts, and you're not going to get enough decent food in your body, how do you expect your body to run? It will for a while, but it never just keeps on going. It's very difficult. The body will do everything it can to try and resist all of the cellular breakdown and the insults that happen, but there's only so much cell energy available to withstand that. And over time, as we age, aging itself has its own burden, and so those kind of things, whether inflammatory states like arthritis or gastrointestinal disorders, and whatever it is, bowel disorders, all begin to wreak havoc. So diets rich in fruits and dark pigmented berries can only be anti-cancer, anti-oxidative, anti-inflammatory. So if you spend your life focusing on those things, you're probably much less likely to get into any of these pathological states than somebody who's just really not paying attention to any of it and is just living it out, just hoping that it's all going to be okay. Okay, so back to metallomatrix proteinases, and these things are, part and parcel of our own physiology. We do need them. Essentially, they're fairly important for growth and decomposition of endometrium tissue. So on the one hand, a female produces an endometrium, and these MMPs are part and parcel of reducing this endometrial tissue. And the VEGF, the vascular endothelial growth factor family, is important in angiogenesis, contributing to the growth and invasion of ectopic endometrium. But obviously, vascular endothelial growth factor is there to provide vascularization to tissues that you want. It's not like you don't want this VEGF. So keeping things in check with a balanced physiology, one that's well orchestrated. And again, Dr. Pete, from the perspective of biological energy, would always argue that anti-inflammatories like progesterone and energy energy mediating compounds like thyroid as a orchestrator of controlled physiology and cell repolarization for maximal contraction without wasting energy is a very important way to live. And if you use these compounds, you're probably much less likely to suffer the negative effects of our diets and our lifestyles with all the inflammation and oxidation and the stress involved and cortisol, etc. Okay, so that's metallomatrix proteinases.
It also mentions here that green tea polyphenols and grapeseed extract are also being investigated for their MMP controlling properties.
There you go. Good. All right, we've talked, let me just say here, you listen to Ask Your Herb Dr. KMUD Garberville 91.1 FM. From 7:30, which is right around now, till the end of the show, you're invited to call in with any questions. The number's 707-923-3911. So we'll take callers any time from now until the top of the hour at 5 to 8. Okay, so to continue, some other compounds specifically used for the treatment of endometriosis and the way they do it, so we can try and wrap up the plant families that produce these anti-inflammatory compounds and these anti-proliferative compounds. Nothing would be complete without mentioning ginseng. And ginsenoside RG3 was a particular compound extracted from ginseng. Ginseng contains this, but unfortunately, when research is done, they tend to specifically isolate compounds, and then the dietary supplement machine grabs hold of it and produces these specific compounds and says that it's all down to this, and that you can't just take ginseng whole because it's not going to be enough of this isolated compound, and you have to buy these RG3 concentrated extracts. Well, I don't subscribe to that myself. I rather see whole plants as being much more balanced. I don't see the isolated ingredient as being the specific compound, and I think you're much better off being whole in your approach to treatment of disease using herbs than you are in isolating specific compounds. I mean, there is a grain of salt to be had with reckoning that. I mean, aspirin, for example, everyone talk about aspirin being pulled out of willow bark or some other substances to provide that compound, and aspirin is the thing you want. I mean, there's probably no problem in taking white willow bark extract, but the amount of aspirin in the bark is not going to be, you're going to have to be consuming a fair amount. Okay, we have a caller on the air. Let's take this first caller. Caller where from, and what's your question?
I'm from Northern Humboldt, and I have a couple questions. Sounds like I have an echo. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you fine. I don't have an echo on my end.
Perfect. Okay. Two questions. One, kind of a general, I was going to ask you and your wife personally if you believe in, some benefit besides a purely scientific one regarding eating live plants, basically. If you think there's something about picking flowers and eating them directly or having your food super fresh. I think we've said there are some benefits, but do you think there's like a metaphysical kind of energy garnering aspect to it?
Yeah,
go ahead.
I would, without jumping straight into the answer here, I would say for sure, if you have your own garden and you grow your own vegetables and you use organic practices and you produce some really nice vegetables, then I know for a fact that they just taste so different, and there's just something definitely metaphysically better than even the same product bought as certified organic from a store. Even if it looks good, it's just, you can't beat it. If it's fresh and it's just there and you've picked it, I think that is the height of the benefit of what it is you're cooking. If you eat it raw.
Cool. Yeah, I tend to agree and believe the same thing. The second thing is a friend of mine was talking about St. John's wort.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of the wild weed,
Klamath weed.
Yeah, classified by Caltrans as weed. But both I have two siblings who use it for kind of mental health regulation, and they both, they can't handle the stronger pharmaceuticals, but
Right.
that really helps a lot. Regular use. I was going to ask. So my friend said there are perhaps two super similar looking flowers or something, and they can grow together. Have you? Are you familiar with that?
No, not really. I think the only thing I will say is that the Hypericum perforatum, which is the St. John's wort, that grows here in California and that we've picked in Bryceland and other places growing wild, actually has a smaller leaf. The leaf shape and size is smaller than the European St. John's wort, and I wonder that there may be some very slight species variation between perforatums. There may be a subspecies that we have here, but I do not believe you'll find another plant growing anywhere near it that looks anything like it to confuse
Well, there
it
is a
with.
little yellow kind of like composite flower.
Well, it's a totally different family.
Well, I know it is, but I mean, maybe if you're not an experienced plant identifier. But one way that is a pretty fail-safe way of knowing that you actually have Hypericum perforatum is the leaves are perforated. So on the other thing that's like kind of like a hawksweed with multiple branched florets that you could possibly confuse with St. John's wort, it will not have perforations. It's like pin pricks in the
Yeah,
leaf. So if
they're
you pick
punctate.
the leaf and you look at it up to the sun or in front of a light, you'll see all these little pin pricks in the leaf. That's St. John's wort. That's Hypericum perforatum.
Okay, and does the other plant have a common name that maybe is familiar or not really?
Well, I mean, it could be like a multi-branched hawksweed.
Yeah, so different though. I think it'd be really hard pressed to confuse them.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, and would you say that the domesticated ornamental St. John's wort might have similar properties, or do you think that might have been diluted?
Yeah, if it's a St. John's wort, if it's a Hypericum, yeah, it should be structurally similar.
But those ones often don't have very many flowers. Those ornamental
We're not
Hypericums
talking
that have the
about-
big
No,
flowers, is that the ones you're
rose-
talking about?
Yeah, that's the Rose of Sharon.
Yeah.
That's the Rose of
Yeah.
Sharon. That's Hypericum calicinum. That's a very different plant. It's much bigger flowers. It's like
Yes.
it's almost the size of the palm of your hand.
So is that a totally different?
Totally different.
Plant.
Totally
Yeah,
different.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, I'll let you keep on. Thank you for
All
the
right,
show.
yeah.
Happy
Thank-
harvesting, and
thanks
you
for your
can.
questions.
I just want to say one more thing, caller. You can make an easy Hypericum St. John's wort tincture with just by picking the flowers, picking the flowers and the flowering tops. Really doesn't have to be just flowers. Letting them dry and then putting them in like a 45% to 60% alcohol, and that will make a beautiful red tincture.
Or you could do
Nice.
it fresh
Oh,
if you wanted to.
One last thing. Would you say that there's any issue with using raw linseed oil as your base to, if you were going to, infuse
The flowers?
linseed oil
Yeah,
with
definitely not.
Yeah.
No, I wouldn't, because it would go rancid very, very quickly. So you want to use something like a jojoba, or an olive is okay, but it will go rancid as well. I prefer jojoba for the St. John's wort oil.
If you want to produce a red oil,
Yeah.
which is the classic hallmark of St. John's wort oil, then yeah, jojoba is very resistant to oxidation. It's probably one of the most stable oils there is.
And liquid,
to
'cause
pull out those compounds.
Where do you get that? I've never heard
Oh,
of it.
anyway, most good, even Chautauqua would have jojoba oil, I'm sure.
And the health food stores will have jojoba
Yeah,
oil, or
mo-
if
most
you're
health
not
food
near a
stores.
store, then you can order online.
Yeah, it's
But you
spelled-
want to pick the red, in order to get the red oil, you need to have fresh flowers.
See, my friend said his was orangey. Would that be a sign of it going a little rancid, or is that just not
No.
concentrated in?
Yeah,
Oh, no, maybe, in order to get the red to color to really develop, you need to put it in the sun.
Oh, okay, awesome. All right, thank you so much.
Yeah,
I
you got
really
it.
appreciate it.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks for your
So-
call.
Let's take this next caller. Caller, you're on the air. Where from, and what's your question?
I'm from Humboldt here in the middle, and I have a condition called amyloidosis,
Yeah. Hmm.
and somewhat long-standing, and I've survived a lot of things subsequent to Agent Orange exposure 60 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But I've survived several different types of cancer. What I'm after is trying to figure out how to slow the progression of the thickening of the heart muscle, which I believe is my problem
Okay.
with this
Go on.
current infection.
Okay. So, have you had an ultrasound done that's showing an increased thickening of the cardiac muscle wall?
Yep.
No.
Yes.
So, yes or no?
Yes.
You have, right? Okay. So,
One thing that comes to mind immediately, caller, is creatinine is very, very important for the ATP of muscles, but specifically for the heart muscle. And
Okay.
that you can get as a supplement, but foods that contain creatinine, herring actually contains quite a lot of creatinine compared to red meat next in line. And
Okay. We're doing those things.
okay, so yeah, herring is quite high in creatinine, but you might also want to try supplementing with it.
well,
I think we are.
we've just mentioned two anti-inflammatory compounds in relation to endometriosis and the inflammatory effects of endometriosis. Well, both green tea and turmeric have this anti-inflammatory activity. The polyphenols in green tea and then curcumin specifically in turmeric. They've done studies on this for protein misfolding, which is a kind of hallmark of amyloid, and shown that there has been positive benefit in reducing the effects of amyloid because of the inflammation. It's basically an inflammation-driven process.
Okay.
They've also
Well,
they
I
also
think we're on board with most
go on.
of that subject matter. Yes. We've been using turmeric and sardines, fish oil, small fish.
I don't recommend any of the fish oils as any treatment for amyloid, but
No, it's not the fish oils. It's the actual protein. Yeah.
And also ginger, using daily ginger, daily turmeric.
Okay.
I think those
Well-
are some helpful herbal supplements.
Well, I'll follow this up then, and
you-
thank you for your time.
Yeah, you want to be focusing on the anti-inflammatories as part of your daily food intake, and anti-inflammatory supplements and herbs being added to your daily foods, and making sure that your food and your diet is an anti-inflammatory diet, because there's plenty of things that you'll eat in your food that will be pro-inflammation. So you need to be mindful of that for sure.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Okay, now you
Thank
got
you
it.
for your call.
Okay, I think there was another caller on the air. Okay, they dropped off. Okay, no problem. Okay, this is Ask Your Herb Doctor, KMUD Garberville 91.1 FM, and now there's a terrible echo on the line.
Oh, there we go.
All right, I think you have the phone line open. Okay, so it's 7:45, so until, 7:55, we're able to take calls, and the number is 707-923-3911. Okay, so I was going to start talking about ginsenoside RG3, which is an isolated compound from ginseng that you don't necessarily need to be specific about having rather than ginseng as a whole plant extract. So this glycoside is actually a steroid glycoside, and next month I want to, and I keep going on about terpenes, mono, di, and triterpenes. It's just an awesome class of phytochemical. Ultimately, these build squalene, and squalene builds cholesterol, and cholesterol produces pregnenolone and all the other steroid hormones like testosterone and progesterone, etc. Very important building blocks of phytochemical, and the mint family are a classic expressor of these terpenes. I mean, obviously cannabis does too. That's one of the locals' plant favorites in this area for sure, but plenty of different plant families produce terpenes as part of their biochemistry, and the fragrance that you get from these terpenes are the things that classically make people drawn to a certain plant, where they crush it and they smell it. So that things like rosemary and mint and basil and thyme and all those other wonderful aromatics. So talking about ginsenoside then, is a triterpene saponin, So it has antioxidative, anti-inflammatory, and anti-MMP, metallomatrix proteinase activity. A clinical study demonstrated that ginsenoside RG3 attained consistently high efficiency and few side effects when given with gestrinone. And ginsenoside RG3 can be used as a clinical treatment for endometriosis. Also, a previous study showed that the volume of endometriotic lesions reduced and the MVD, the microvessel density, was lower in ectopic tissues in the ginsenoside RG3 usage group than in the gestrinone group. So, almost better than the quote-unquote treatment. Okay, additionally, ginsenoside RG3 exerted an anti-angiogenic effect by inhibiting the expression of the inhibitors of DNA binding 1 gene and neutropilin 1 gene. Okay, resveratrol. Getting on to resveratrol, we've mentioned this quite a few times now as an awesome anti-inflammatory. It's a polyphenol then, with specifically anti-inflammatory effects. It's found naturally in berries, peanuts, and red wine, and also Japanese knotweed contains large amounts of resveratrol. It exerts an anti-inflammatory effect by inhibiting the release of cytokines. So we've mentioned tumor necrosis factor alpha, interleukin-1, interleukin-8, vascular endothelial growth factor, and MCP1. Okay, so the production also of reactive oxygen species in monocytes, macrophages, and lymphocytes was decreased, and it inhibits the action of nuclear factor kappa beta and has a significant role in cell proliferation, apoptosis, and enlargement of neoplasia through regulating several cytokines and chemokines. So these things act together to inhibit all the pathways that are so important for new vessel growth that feeds an out-of-control tissue growth that has lost its control physiologically with programmed cell death, and what it should be doing structurally and functionally to be useful to you has become useless. Okay, the mechanism of action and the pathophysiology of endometriosis may be similar, as indicated by a study that assessed its effects on an experimentally induced endometriosis rat model and found it to be active against the progression of the illness through its anti-angiogenic and anti-inflammatory properties. So, resveratrol. One or two left, and then I think we'll get on to the next subject if we have time, but otherwise we'll have to leave that for next month. Bicalin. Again, another isolated ingredient from bical skullcap, Scutellaria bicalensis. A study by Jin et al. In 2017 aimed to investigate the potential activities of bicalin on human endometrial stromal cells in vitro. The results indicated that the application of bicalin significantly decreased the viability of human endometrial stromal cells by inhibiting nuclear factor kappa beta signaling. Okay, so the application of bicalin significantly increased the number of cells in the GOG1 phase, whereas the application of bicalin significantly reduced the number of cells in the S and G2M phases. So they suggested that bicalin might suppress the viability of human endometrial stromal cells through the nuclear factor kappa beta signaling pathway, okay, as a novel treatment for endometriosis. And then genistein, another compound from kudzu, Pueria lobata, also in soy and soybeans and tempeh and miso. Genistein then is an isoflavone. It has anti-angiogenic activity in these previous studies that we've mentioned, and the administration of genistein significantly decreased the expression of estrogen receptor alpha, vascular endothelial growth factor, and hypoxia-inducible factor 1 alpha in peritoneal tissues. So genistein also regulated angiogenesis by inhibiting the estrogen receptor in the murine model of peritoneal endometriosis. And then lastly, xanthocumol. And this is from hops, as the name kind of signifies humol from Humulus lupulus. Xanthocumol is a prenylated flavonoid isolated from the female inflorescences of hops as anti-proliferative, anti-inflammatory, anti-angiogenic, and the properties of xanthocumol were proved by previous studies showing it to be effective in reducing the level of phosphoinositide 3 kinase, and this in a mouse model of endometriosis, showing that xanthocumol significantly decreased the microvessel density, as previously mentioned, and it could be considered for the selective treatment of endometriotic lesions. No doubt this may well have been a quote-unquote injectable form.
I just want to mention back about the soybean and the genistin. We had this question come up a couple months ago when Michael was hypothesizing that the fermented soy products contain much higher levels of this anti-inflammatory phytoestrogen, plant-derived isoflavone, the genistin. And it is true that, the miso and tamari products contain a lot more genistin, the medicinal product, which is the more traditional way that the product was eaten in Asia.
Okay, so let's see here, 7:53. If anybody wants to call in, you are welcome. We've got 5 minutes or so before the top of the hour at 707-923-3911. I just want to quickly talk about herbal formulations then, perhaps, for the treatment of endometriosis. And Peony lactiflora and Rehmannia alata from the Orobanchaceae have remarkable anti-inflammatory and antispasmodic effects. So both of these are used to treat endometriosis. And there's a great book written by Mills and Bone. This is Kerry Bone from MediHerb in Australia. And so Simon Mills studied at the School of Phytotherapy, as did Kerry Bone back in the mid-80s. And then Kerry went off back to Australia to start MediHerb. MediHerb has become pretty much worldwide, and standard process carry a lot of MediHerb products. So this article that they both wrote showed that prostaglandins in the myometrium were reduced through the inhibition of phospholipase A2, as well as arachidonic acid and platelet activating factor being reduced, and free radical formation was also inhibited, and smooth muscles were relaxed. So both Peony lactiflora, which is the Chinese white peony, and Rehmannia alata, both used specifically for its anti-inflammatory and antispasmodic effects in the treatment of endometriosis. Now again, another formula with licorice, Glycyrrhiza glabra, and Calendula officinalis. Again, another plant that I have a lot of respect for. Pot marigold is its common name. It's a wonderful plant. I think it has some amazing healing properties, and the carotenes that are so rich in the petals of the ray inflorescence have been well characterized, and both supercritical fluid extract using CO2 as well as ethanol as a solvent for these compounds are well used, well indicated, and calendula has got many different uses, specifically cancers, and so there are certain patients that I remember who've had some excellent results with Calendula officinalis, and for lymphomas and also other lymphatic issues. So in the context of endometriosis, then both licorice and calendula are used as anti-inflammatory agents in the treatment of endometriosis, and calendula has what they call vulnerary wound healing activity, anti-hemorrhagic, anti-inflammatory, and lymphatic properties. And this is what we've already said here in terms of supporting lymphatic drainage. Calendula's got a very well documented research has been done on it. Okay, let's see here. A couple of others. We mentioned plantago. Okay, Plantago lanceolata and licorice, suppressing 5-lipoxygenase and COX-2 enzymes. So, again, most people, I think, they think about Plantago lanceolata, they talk about mucous membrane trophorestorative for hay fever or leaky tissues, respiratory tissues. But again, it has a COX-2 and a 5-lipoxygenase blocking activity. Okay, 4 minutes to 8, and I think what we do here, I think we're just going to talk about what we are going to cover next month. So I think we're done with female reproductive disease, female gynecological issues, different plant families that contain very similar compounds, to introduce the concept of phytochemistry and how plants can be segregated into different genera by their phytochemical expression, not just their morphological characteristics that you can see either macros or microscopically, but now, with DNA, etc., they're ever increasing the division within families. So next month, let's see here, next month, going to talk about an interesting plant that I think is gaining more and more traction as time's gone on. It's got a very interesting historical background. That's Origanum syriacum, or Tsartar, Zaatar. It's an awesome, another labiate, another mint family plant. They call it thyme. I think it's Syrian thyme, but it's not a thymus at all. It's an Origanum. So Origanum syriacum. This is one of the compounds, one of the plants that I'm going to discuss, with all of the wealth of phytochemistry that's been targeting the different mono, di and triterpenes that it contains. I want to get into the whole creation of these terpenes from isoprene as a basic building block, and how all of this in the end forms progesterone and testosterone and all of our steroid hormones, and then get into some of these other anti-inflammatory herbs. Okay, so you keep poking me. Why are you poking me?
We got to get
Okay, here we go. So my name's Andrew Murray.
My name's Sarah Johannesson Murray.
Until the third Friday of next month, you've been listening to Ask Your Herb Doctor. Thank you for the callers, and until next month, we'll see you then.
All rights are reserved.
The views and opinions expressed throughout the broadcast